Hello. Now, when Universal announced they were going to build a theme park here in Britain, I wondered what's the impact of that likely to be on our existing amusement and theme parks? And so I had a look online, watched some videos, read some posts, and people are making some really well thought out, well informed points. But what I noticed was there wasn't really much in the way of using case studies of where international theme park groups have opened resorts to see, well, what are they telling us about could happen? And so I thought I'd start with a really obvious example, Disneyland Paris in 1992. Perhaps by looking at the opening of Disneyland Paris, or Euro Disney as it was called at the time, we might be able to use that to give us an idea about what the impact of Universal Studios GB could be on the British theme park and amusement park industry when it opens in 2031. Now, on the screen are some logos of some of our parks that we have here in Britain at the moment. There's a real mix. We've got parks around at young children, aimed at thrill seekers, aimed at families, aimed at everyone. We've got family-owned parks. We've got parks that are in small chains, parks that are in large chains. We've got parks that are by the seaside. We've got parks that are in the country. We've got parks that are next to urban areas. There's a lot of theme parks here and amusement parks here in the UK. What might be the impact of Universal Resort on them? And so perhaps by looking at Euro Disney, we might be able to work that out. Now, it's just pointing out before we go any further that at the moment in 2025, early 2025, it feels like the UK amusement industry is under a little bit of pressure. I'll come back to that in a moment. The other thing it is worth pointing out is that Euro Disney is an unusual example to compare to Universal. When you look at the opening of Euro Disney in 1992, you find that actually what most of the articles that I've read in tourism journals are all about is the missteps that Disney made with the opening of Euro Disney that led to lower than expected attendance. They didn't take proper consideration of European, particularly French culture. Their pricing was out and their ride offering was out. And actually, there wasn't as much support for Euro Disney in the early years as they thought. And maybe we need to keep that in mind when we look at what that tells us about attendance and profitability at other parks. Perhaps it's not down to what those parks did or the potential impact. Maybe it's down to actually the missteps that Disney made, and Universal probably won't make those same missteps. Now, the 5 parks that I'm going to look at more closely are Parc Asterix, which is the nearest park to Disneyland Paris, Efteling in the Netherlands, Nigloland, which is also in France, and then we've got the Walibi Group, and I picked 2 of their logos there. We've got Walibi Belgium, which is quite near, and Walibi Rhône-Alpes, which is down on the southeast coast of France. And by looking at what happens to those parks because of Disney opening in 1992, perhaps we might be able to better predict or better be able to think about what could happen to our British parks and how might our British parks respond. Now, I pointed out that the British theme park industry at the moment is in a little bit of stress. And the same is true to an extent of what was happening in France in the late 1980s, early 1990s. Now, there had been a number of theme parks open in the 1980s. But in the period from when they announced that Euro Disney is going to happen to when Disney opens, a number of theme parks really start to struggle. And we've got some parks on the screen now. We've got, I mean, there's the odd one on there because literally it was open like 2 weeks. And that is Planet Magique. It opened in December 1989 and closed in 1990. Didn't get the visitor numbers. Actually, also didn't get the financial side of it sorted. So that's a different one. That's a bit of the odd one. I mean, the most famous example on there, because you'll have probably seen videos where people explore the abandoned park, or you see photos of the massive gargantua statue, is Myropolis. Now, Myropolis is French theme park. It was opened in 1987, so after they started to announce the construction of Euro Disney, but it closes before Euro Disney opens. You might think, well, what's the link? Well, Monopolis didn't get the attendance it wanted, and it was relying on finance from banks. And in 1991, banks refused to increase the finances for the park. And partly that was because they felt that the park would not be able to compete effectively with the opening of Euro Disney. Another part that really struggled was Zygopholis. Zygopholis. I'll go with that, which was near Nice in Provence. And that also had lower than expected attendance. It actually was relying on finance, and that finance dried up in the lead up to the opening of Euro Disney. So it shut in 1991. You've then got the Park of the Golden Fleece. I'm not going to attempt to say that in French. Now, that did survive the first year. It closed in 1993. But it was financially struggling. It struggled to get loans. It didn't get the attendance it wanted. And so in France, even before the opening of the park, Euro Disney was having an impact on French theme parks. If French theme parks were struggling with attendance already and relying on finance, well, actually, banks were becoming increasingly more reluctant to extend that finance once Euro Disney was announced, because actually they felt that these parks wouldn't be able to survive. And so perhaps that is a bit of a hint to what could be happening to British theme parks in the next few years between now and sort of 2031. Perhaps parks that aren't getting the attendance that they expect, they're relying on loans, they're losing money. Actually, perhaps those parks might be at risk of closing because banks think that they're not going to be able to compete. And the fact that these parks were struggling hints at something that you don't normally see when you read newspaper articles from the time. So I've read French newspaper articles, Belgian newspaper articles, English articles, and when they quote park management are always talking about how they're excited for the opening of Euro Disney, how it's not excited, but they're sort of like they're thinking it's going to be good competition, it's going to help them raise their game, it's going to bring greater attendance to the theme parks. But actually, as those parks going under suggest, there was some fear. Now, there was a really good interview on a podcast with the former deputy director of Efteling during this period. And on it, he said, we didn't know at all what was going to happen. That is what's going to happen after Disney opens. There was an enormous tension as Euro Disney's competition was all much bigger than we were used to. We saw the storm that was coming our way. So this actually hints at the fear that there really was. And when you read articles from the time, the quotes from the management suggest that they're expecting to benefit from increased tourism visitor numbers, and they're looking forward to the competition that's going to help improve theme parks. Actually, reporters are sort of hinting that maybe there is this fear that's underlying it. And as we'll see, there was dips for most parks, not most parks, but some parks saw a dip in attendance of around 20 to 30%. And there was a hit on profits for some European theme parks once Euro Disney opened. And this fear that was not talked about at the time, but actually you see afterwards, perhaps that fear is there. Perhaps in the offices of Merlin, the Looping Group, there is a little bit of fear about what's going to come. There's this competition, they don't know what to expect, but they won't ever say that in media interviews. They'll talk about how it's going to bring people to the park, how it's going to be good competition. And another thing that really points to this worry about the impact of Euro Disney, and therefore also what potential Universal might be, was what happened just over a year after the park had opened. Was that, and this is summed up by the Los Angeles Times quite nicely in an article, they said 5 of Europe's largest theme parks are teaming up to offset intense competition from Euro Disneyland. And so in 1993, the parks were Europa Park in Germany, Alton Towers here in Britain, Liseberg in Sweden, Parc Asterix in France, and the Efteling in the Netherlands. And the Efteling was the driving force behind this. In 1993, those 5 parks come together to deal with what they saw as intense competition. So after a year of Disney, they feel there's so much competition they've got to work together, these 5 parks. And so they were, and what the Great European Theme Parks did is they worked together on marketing and making approaches to travel agents and travel companies. So they were helping each other out with marketing there. They also offered a scheme where if you had an annual pass in one of the 5 parks, your annual pass would get you into the other parks for 1 day a year. So if you had an Alton Towers annual pass, you could go to Parc Asterix and you could actually get 1 day out there, or you could go to Liseberg. And in 1996, Portaventura joins the Great European Theme Parks Group. And so they work together on that, on marketing, on you could go and use your tickets. The other thing that was really interesting was they were sharing their expertise and their purchase power. So Great European Theme Parks started purchasing parts from manufacturers in bulk together. And by the way, this was the brainchild of the same Efteling deputy director. I'll give you an example. In 1996, Vekoma sent to Great European Theme Parks some trains that had been purchased by Great European Theme Parks. Well, not by Great European Theme Parks, but been purchased by Efteling and Alton Towers working together. So Corkscrew and Python in 1996 got new trains from Vekoma, which were purchased more cheaply with the parks working together through Great European Theme Parks. And so you can see that actually parks are responding to what they see as a threat by working together. Perhaps that's what we'll see in Britain. But it also shows that there was a real fear and that actually was a real impact that parks felt there was intense competition, that they've actually got to do what they can to cut costs and to be able to work together to survive. Let's start to look at some of these case studies. I'm going to go as quick as I can through this. We'll start with Nigloland, which is 132 miles, that's 214 kilometres away from Disneyland Paris. Now, the park had, between when it opened in the late 80s up to the year before Disneyland opens, its attendance had been increasing steadily year on year. Its profitability had been increasing too. It was in a strong financial position when Euro Disney opened in 1992. And in preparation for Euro Disney, they opened a new themed area in 1992, which was a Canadian themed area. And the ride that anchored this new Canadian village was a Mack-powered mine train to do with gold mines. And this themed area actually was part of a whole series of attractions. Now, their attendance in 1991 had been about 350,000 people, and actually in 1992 it stayed at 350,000 people. So Nigloland was, because it was a more regional theme park, and actually looking at its attendance, it didn't really draw attendance from across France. It was more from the local area. It was more a local park. Actually, it weathered the storm of the opening of Euro Disney. And then they continue to invest in 1993, and they keep investing, and their attendance continues to go up. So perhaps that's a lesson, that if you're quite far away from the new park, then maybe you are going to be able to weather the storm, particularly if you're a park that draws your attendance very locally. I should also point out you're a park that also is in a good financial position at the start, and we'll talk about that in a minute. Now, the Walibi Group had parks both in Rhône-Alpes, which is 355 miles away, that's 572 kilometres, but also more far nearer Euro Disney, Disneyland Paris. For example, Walibi Belgium, 205 miles, that's 350 kilometres. So most of their parks were nearer to Euro Disney, apart from Rhône-Alpes. And the Walibi Group financially was actually in a really strong position in 1991, the year before Disneyland opens. Their profits had risen 9 years, year on year, as had their attendance. The Walibi Group was in a strong financial and attendance position. And ready for the opening of Euro Disney, they opened a series of attractions. So, for example, at Walibi Belgium, they spent 6 million euros, which was their biggest investment, on what is now called Calamity Mine, but back then was called Colorado. It was a Vekoma mine train. It was part of a themed area. They also put in, slightly less expensively, down at Roan Alps, a Zero Tivoli coaster, perhaps because they felt that it was further away, it was going to be less impacted. Now, the Walibi Group saw, for the first time, a dip in its annual attendance. So attendance has been going up year on year. Actually, there was a dip in attendance because, and they felt this was because of Euro Disney. Profitability, for the first time, there'd been a drop in profitability, and their operating profit dropped nearly 70% in the first 8 months of Euro Disney opening. So actually, they took a huge financial hit, but they continued to invest. So once they'd actually restructured their finances, in 94, 95, they started to invest in their parks. And their attendance decreases. So their attendance stabilised in 93, 94. They sorted the finances out, and then they started to invest. But actually, their finances were in a strong position before the arrival of Euro Disney, but they took a financial hit, 70% in their operating profitability in the first 8 months that Disneyland Paris opened. So perhaps there is there a lesson that some parks are going to have a huge hit in their attendance, well, not in their attendance so much, but a huge hit in their profitability and a hit in their attendance. And I mean, Walibi was lucky it was in a strong financial position. So hopefully, if British Parks are in a strong financial position, they'll be able to weather the storm if they, like the Walibi Group, have a hit on their profits. Now, the nearest park to Disneyland Paris is Parc Asterix. It's 39 miles, and that's 63 kilometres away. And like the Walibi Group, Parc Asterix, their attendance has been increasing. So it began in the late 1980s. By 1991, their attendance was about 1.4 million a year. They had been investing steadily. Financially, their finances were really improving. And to prepare for the opening of Euro Disney, they invested about 19 million francs, so 3 million euros, on a number of attractions and improving theming. They also put in their own radio station. But they found that their attendance dropped. So there were 1.4 million people the year before Disney opens. The year Disney opens, 1992, they dipped to below 1 million. So they lose about 400,000 people. Its financial figures were the worst in its history at that point. And in the French press, there is real talk that actually Parc Asterix could be on the risk of bankruptcy. American newspapers that I've read, they talk about actually how Parc Asterix isn't viable and perhaps it's going to close in the face, and I'm going to quote here, the Disney behemoth. The attendance doesn't drop the next season, it stabilises, and they actually slowly add more and more rides to their lineup, and actually they start to build back up. And that might explain why. So they took a financial hit. That might explain why Parc Asterix was one of the great European theme parks. So yeah, they took a financial hit. They took an attendance hit. But luckily they were in a fairly strong situation at the start that allowed them to weather the storm. Efteling, not in France, in the Netherlands, 281 miles or 453 kilometres away. Again, another park whose attendance has been steadily increasing year on year. Another park who was in a financially quite stable situation in 1991. But 1992, they had 100,000 fewer visitors, and they attributed that, Efteling did, to the opening of Euro Disney. They took steps to try to improve their position. They began to plan new rides. They looked at reviewing the park to do whatever they could to actually get back. And the deputy director I quoted before said that it soon became clear that they had wind in their sails, and that's partly because Disney did everything wrong they could in the marketing field. So Efteling now, the deputy director, saying, look, that actually they did things that they needed to, but actually, luckily, Disney took some missteps. But yeah, Efteling, like the Walibi Group, like Parc Asterix, saw a dip in attendance. Now, talk about French parks and one Dutch one. What about here in the Midlands, in the UK? Because you might not really imagine that there was much of an impact here. Well, actually, there seems there was. So in 1991, BBC Midlands Today, which is a local news programme that's broadcast by the BBC for the Midlands area, that's the centre of Britain, they ran a piece on Disney trying to appeal to travel agents and travel companies to get them ready to basically take people there the next year. And this piece juxtaposed this big conference where you had 500 travel agents, and Disney was wining and dining them, putting on all this entertainment for them, and showing them models and sort of really wowing them. And it juxtaposed that with construction at Alton Towers. And the reporter said that the arrival of Europe's largest theme park as part of Euro Disney has prompted a multi-million-pound investment here in the Midlands. So they are linking what happens in Alton Towers. So in 1992, you get the Runaway Mine Train and you get the Haunted House open. And there's a direct line there being drawn by BBC Midlands Today between the opening of Disney to that. So actually, Alton Towers are putting the investment in. Now, in the same piece, they interview somebody from Alton Towers and they say that they're looking forward to competition that's going to actually bring people to theme parks. But the fact that they are putting this money in shows that they are doing what they can to limit people going to this new park. And that's further hinted when later on they say that actually it's part of a £10 million investment, and Alton Towers is spending £3.5 million on a marketing campaign. That's more than they've ever spent before. But it then puts into context that Disney has actually already spent £7 million in TV marketing in Britain alone up to that point. So it talks about the competition that's faced there. Now, growing up, I would never have seen this. 1994 to me was a fantastic year. You had Shockwave opening at Drayton Manor, you had the big one at Blackpool Pleasure Beach, you had Nemesis, and then you also had previously opened the Ultimate at Lightwater Valley. And the year of the roller coaster was a really big thing. Now, the Times newspaper, in an article on the 16th of March 1994, they draw a direct line between everything that happens in 1994 to a response to the opening of Euro Disney in 1992, 2 years before. So in the article, it begins with this bit where it says, during their winter break, most British and European theme parks have invested tens of £millions in new roller coasters and other developments. And it links that directly to Euro Disney. And they're saying that so it says that this is about reviving interest in their own businesses. That them spending these millions of pounds on roller coasters and other thrill rides is about them reviving interest in their own businesses. And so in 1994, you get 93 and 1994, you get a slurry of big rides being built, partly because it's about pulling people to British theme parks and their thrill rides, because actually there isn't those thrill rides at Disney. It also carries on that it talks about the English Tourist Board's Year of the Roller Coaster. There's an extraordinary number of white knuckle rides being opened. It talks about the Pepsi Max Big One. It talks about Nemesis. It talks about Chester World of Adventures, which is opening Terror 2. It then talks about Thorpe Park apparently is having a children's area worth a couple of million. It then talks about how continental parks like Parc Asterix have built a new roller coaster, the Flight of Icarus. You've got Dream Flight at Efteling. And And then it talks about how Disney is taking steps to deal with the slide in their attendance, not being what they want. They've got some new rides doing, but it's saying that actually Euro Disney's big next attraction, however, will not be operating until 1995. Discovery Mountain, a roller coaster ride based on the popular Space Mountain in Florida, and it talks about how actually without this, they're going to struggle. It then says that Euro Disney faces another challenge next year when Pearson, through its Tussauds Group, is going to open Portaventura. And the bit that I really think sums this up quite nicely, it says, Mickey Mouse could be in deep trouble when more theme park rides. Sorry, I could read that again. Mickey Mouse could be in deep trouble when more theme park rides, including terrifying new rides, open. So actually, there's a really interesting thing here. It talks about how once you get to 1994, yes, there's this fear about Disney, but also that Disney's very much on the back foot because they haven't got the thrill rides, and the thrill rides that we've now got in the UK and other ones in Europe that happened in the 90s were part of a response to dealing with Disney, particularly as Disney didn't have the thrill rides that they potentially should have had when it opened. So now I just want to draw some strands together to really sum up what could be the impact of the opening of Universal here in Britain. But there is an important comparison to make, and I've already hinted at it, which is Euro Disney made a huge number of missteps. Perhaps Universal won't make them. Euro Disney also wasn't particularly welcomed in France. There was a survey in 1986 where they found that 52% of people approved of Disney building a park and 33% of people strongly disapproved. There was a famous quote where it says by this lady called Ariane Mushklein, which says that Euro Disney is a cultural snowball. That actually it's destroying French culture. The Liberation newspaper called it a symbol of American imperialism. So there wasn't really much warmth or welcome amongst certain sections of France to Euro Disney. And then Disney themselves made missteps with understanding French culture. The rides they chose to open. So yes, they had Big Thunder Mountain, but they didn't have Space Mountain. Actually, there wasn't potentially the rides there that could have been. Now, Universal, on the other hand, well, we know from the survey that they did 6,000 people, 92% of people are in favour. They're working with local community organisations. They say they're trying to understand British culture and incorporate that. There is a feeling amongst people, experts that have been spoken to, that actually Universal are going to try and make things better suited to the British weather, that actually Universal aren't going to make the mistakes that Euro Disney did. And perhaps theme parks in Britain aren't going to be able to capitalise on Universal's mistakes the way that French and European theme parks did in response to Euro Disney's strategic mistakes they made at the start. So just to draw those lessons together then, that actually theme parks in France, some of them took a financial hit and some took an attendance hit when Euro Disney opened. They built rides the year it was due to open, and then actually they took the hit, and then because of the gap in Disneyland's lineup, there wasn't really thrill rides. They built thrill rides, and actually they increased their attendance, and they were able to weather the financial storm because their finances were already in strong positions. Perhaps that might be what we see in Britain, but it is worth pointing out, as I said at the start, the British amusement industry is currently in quite a bit of stress. Merlin Entertainments, for example, that owns Alton Towers, Legoland, Chessington, Thorpe Park. We have a lot of these are outdated figures because you don't have to report your figures until a year or two after they've actually happened. So the last one we know about is 2023. They actually had a £214 million pre-tax loss. Actually, that was less. Sorry, it was more of a loss than the previous year. So Merlin Entertainments, we know at the moment, have cut entertainment. They have shut down near me the Bear Grylls experience. They're looking at offloading some sea life centres. So, I mean, their previous CEO has gone. But actually, Merlin Entertainment at the moment is financially not in a strong place. The Looping Group that owns Pleasurewood Hills, Drayton Manor, and Westminster Safari Park, they are reporting a loss in the UK. So Drayton Manor, we know that their profits actually ended up dropping. So 4 of the 5 last years, they've actually seen a loss. Their profits dropped from, they were making 2.9 million profits in 2022 to 140,000 in 2024. So their profits are dropping. Pleasurewood Hills has gone from a small profit to a loss. Blackpool Pleasure Beach, we know last year made a £1.7 million loss. Flamingo Land have actually seen their profits fall quite a bit from 4.6 million to 1.2 million. Portland's Park, their profits are down 1.19 million. Profits before taxation is 1.19 million down from 2022 to 2023. Their profits are down. We know from stuff that's been posted online, so for example, Great Yarmouth Pleasure Beach, they talked about how their profitability is under threat. We've seen theme parks go under in this off season. Oakwood, Flambard. So it's very much under stress at the moment. And actually, perhaps that doesn't bode as well as we might think for the UK. Well, perhaps it bodes as bad as we think for the UK theme park industry. That just as those French parks struggled to get finance to be able to keep on ticking over, perhaps some of our theme parks might struggle to get finance as banks start to work out what potentially might be the implications. For those parks that do manage to sort their finances out before the opening of Universal, perhaps we'll see some investments in 2031, and then actually perhaps we'll see some of their attendance fall. I mean, we do know that there was an increase in attendance in theme parks because of Euro Disney in the longer term. Perhaps that's what we'll see. But it's going to be very much a mixed situation here in Britain, and that actually, Euro Disney shows that it could have been far trickier for French theme parks if Euro Disney hadn't have made the missteps they did. The other thing that's worth pointing out is that Universal's ride lineup seems to be far more thrilling, and also there seems to be still children's areas, so they perhaps have got the bigger mix of rides that Euro Disney didn't have. So perhaps actually the lesson is that we might be seeing parks get a dip in attendance. We might be seeing parks get a dip in profitability. We might see parks going under before it opens as banks start to actually look at whether they want to be extending loans because of what they see as the potential threat. But to end on a positive, what we might see, and this is what I hope, is we might see the kind of resurgence that we saw in the 1990s. The year of the roller coaster, which I would never have thought comes out of this competition with Euro Disney. Perhaps we'll see something again where theme parks in Britain or in Europe actually work more closely together and develop the sorts of thrill rides that made the 1990s, in enthusiasts' mind, this almost golden age. Perhaps we'll see something like that again. Fingers crossed.